I dropped out of college and went and got my Microsoft certifications. I don't come from a financial background, right?
Brian acquired a commercial kitchen appliance repair and maintenance company in Tampa, Florida, about 2 years ago.
It's 95% service and repair work.
And how much are they paying you each time? What is like an average visit?
So an average ticket is around $820. We are on track to double our revenue from the time that I bought it this year, which sounds kind of crazy. And even sounds crazy to me when I looked at the numbers this quarter. We did almost 1.2 million in top line sales. It was just phenomenal for us. I kind of had a feeling it was there. I just needed to be uncovered. Gotta go look for it.
Hey everyone, it's Helen from SMB Deal Hunter. Today we have Brian Seeling with us. Brian acquired a commercial kitchen appliance repair and maintenance company in Tampa, Florida about 2 years ago. After dropping out of college, Brian worked in IT for about 15 years prior to buying this business, including starting his own IT managed service company, which he later sold his interest in. So really looking forward to digging into Brian's story today. Brian, it is great to have you on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Helen. I appreciate it.
Well, Brian, let's start with your background. And, I kind of covered it a little, but, maybe summarize the past 15 years or so before getting into acquisitions and what kind of prompted you to even get into business ownership and then buying a business later on.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I wasn't an IT nerd, so to speak, right? Growing up in the 90s, but and in the early 2000s. But for me, I gravitated to wanting to jump into a field that I could make money quickly. And so IT was it, especially in the early 2000s, right? And you got certifications and you were making some decent money. And so that's what I did. And that's what prompted me to drop out of college, is I thought to myself, hey, I don't want to be loaded in debt. Like how can I make money, right? How can I get there? And that kind of entrepreneurial mindset was always been a part of me, even growing up as a kid. So, I got into the IT space. I learned a lot about sales and marketing and how to run a company and how not to run a company, and just absorbed as much as I could. And then it was time for me to take that step out and do my own thing. I did. Started at MSP, ran it for several years, sold my interest. And then I was like, what's next? Right? What do I do next? And I said, hey, let's maybe buy a business. I read a book, Buy Then Build, right? That most people do, or they really kind of, don't know anything about the space and get into it. And I just had this moment of, yeah, let's go buy something. So
I'm curious when you started thinking about, when you read the book, when you started thinking about buying a business as opposed to, maybe starting one again from scratch, did you think you were going to stay in sort of the IT field and maybe buy an MSP, or, what did your buy box look like going into this? Because obviously you ended up in a completely different industry.
Yeah. I think I saw what was happening in the IT space from a, AI perspective. And I just there was a lot of uncertainty around how that was going to affect white collar jobs, right? What was that going to do over the next 5 to 10 years? And I was looking for something that I could buy and run and operate, until I want to retire or until I, sell it, whatever the case is. And I did look at some MSPs. I'm not gonna say I didn't, but the asking prices seemed to be a little high. I felt like, and I uncovered that private equity is all over the MSP space. And so the multiples were just, I wasn't comfortable with, especially coming from the MSP world. Like, I'm not paying that much for this. It's straight up. Like, I'm just not going to do that. And private equity has the capital to do such a thing, right? And especially if it's in a market that they're trying to gain market share in, they'll pay the extra dollars for it. And I just wasn't comfortable with that. And honestly, blue collar is great, right? And running my own IT services firm, I had techs. So I understood, what it might look like running a trade business or looking at the trade business. And so that's what I set out to do. I was like, I'll still dabble and look, as anyone should when they're going through the process of, acquisition. They should absolutely look at all kinds of businesses, right? And really peel back the onion. But ultimately, I settled on PGM for several reasons. So,
And what were some of the other deals maybe you looked at? And tell us about maybe, other than industry or just like, you're looking at blue collar, but where were you looking? Maybe rough deal size you were looking at. Give us an overview there.
Yeah, so I was gonna finance it through the SBA. So, it was gonna be, somewhere in the, 800,000 to 1.5 million at EBITDA, right, range was where I was comfortable with. And because I knew I had to, put in some of my own capital. I was looking in the Southwest if it was something that was going to be a physical location that I had to, go to every day. But I looked at a really cool business, which was they did plush for claw machines. And but they apparently had rights to like official plush, like official like Marvel stuffed animals and like certain like things that you just couldn't go and just get from China, right? And I was really fascinated by that business because it was really simple, right? All it did was it had suppliers in place, right? And it just sold stuffed animals to claw machine operators, right? It was the coolest. And then so then I dove into that whole industry and that whole world of vending machines and like game. I'm like, so I ended up not moving forward with it because there was lots of things that I didn't like about the business. Once you again peel back the onion, but I realized I love looking at deals. Like I love going through and looking at deals and checking these things out, understanding how they operate and these little niche businesses that you would have thought of existed, but here they are, and so I enjoyed that part of it. But PGM, the business that I bought, was the first business I found on what's it called again? BizBuySell. Yeah, yeah. It was the first business I saw on
That's crazy.
BizBuySell. Crazy. First broker I ever reached out to was this business. Right. So it just, it's kind of like when you go looking for a house and a real estate agent shows you all these listings and they kind of know what you're looking for. And they show you the best one first. But
Yeah.
you're like, I want to go look at some other stuff. They end up going back and buying the original one, so.
And how long were you looking before? Obviously, you found this was the first deal you looked at, but how long were you actually searching before you went maybe under LOI on this one?
Not long, right? So I started officially searching in like April, and then I was still working at the time, and so it was kind of a part-time thing. And yeah, I submitted like my paperwork to check out the sim, got the sim back, and I put an offer in within a couple of like a month,
Wow.
but the deal fell apart like 3 times before we actually got it to close. So I was technically searching, I guess you would say, for 6 months because this deal fell apart several times. And that's why I still kept looking at other things, right? Because you just never know. So
I can relate to, the love for looking at the deals. I think it is, one of the most interesting parts of this whole journey is just learning about all these random businesses you
yeah,
would have never known existed that you
100%.
would never think to start, but once you're like, oh, this makes money, this makes how much money, and
Yeah,
it's pretty cool. I think it's a fun game. But
yeah.
hey, quick break from the episode. If you're serious about buying a small business in the next 6 to 12 months, check out our business buying accelerator, S&B Deal Hunter Pro. We source deals both on and off market, catered exactly to your criteria. We give you one-on-one support with M&A advisors to help you review deals, structure offers, and negotiate with sellers. On top of that, we help you secure financing so you can buy a 7-figure business with as little as $50 to $100K down. In the past year alone, we've helped our members close over $60 million in deals. Some escaped their 9-to-5s and avoided layoffs. Others added to their growing portfolios. If you want to be next, head to pro.smbdealhunter.xyz to apply. The link's also in the description below. All right, back to the episode. Tell us then about PGM. When you came across it, what attracted you to the business initially?
A couple things. One, it was in an area that I wanted to be in Tampa. It was blue collar. It was the right size. Wasn't too large. Wasn't too small. It also, but it looked like something I could scale. I think that's the biggest thing that I was looking for was scalability, and not being demographically locked or locked into a certain vertical or any of those things where some of the like franchise opportunities kind of lock you in. But I wanted to make it as big as I wanted to, or keep it as small as I wanted to, but always have that in my back pocket. And so that offer that it looked like, at least on the surface, that it provided all those things. So then I got the sim, and when I got the sim, one of the things that made it even more enticing for me was there was a manager in place that wasn't the owner. So the owner at the time was still a technician, still running calls. He had somebody else that had been with him for a very long time that was actually running the back office. And so for me, I was like, that's great because that provided me with a soft landing into a new industry that I didn't know anything about. And in most business, like 70% of it's all the same, right? It's all the same APAR people, like it's all the same stuff, right? But the other 30% is that is the nuance of that particular industry that you have to learn and pick up. And so for me, I was, I needed that buffer.
Yeah.
And it had that. So I'm like, all right, this sounds good. Let's dive a little deeper. So
And what problems did you find that, caused, I guess, this 6-month delay or the deal falling apart 3 times?
yeah, well, as most brokers, right, when they put together sims, they can be exaggerated.
Indeed.
Right? Let's just without getting into all the details, let's just say that
It's marketing material. I think people often forget
yeah,
that. Like,
yeah.
they're
And
trying to sell
so
you.
when you go through your due diligence and you start looking at the numbers and like, that's a long shot, right? It really wasn't making that much money. And so, so that wasn't, you don't want to retrade, but that's one of the things that's challenging about when you do go to put an LOI in is that you're doing it under the assumption that everything the broker has put on that sim is accurate.
Yep.
And a lot of times it's not. So it's one of those tricky areas where you have to navigate because then once you dive in and do your due diligence, there may be a point where you look at it and say, I don't feel comfortable paying that price because the cash flow isn't there. So then you got to go back to the seller and say, unfortunately, Mr. Seller, the price I offered you isn't going to work. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the first time when it fell apart. Right. So the numbers weren't there. And so
How did you determine the numbers weren't there?
So going through just a good quality of earnings, I had my CPA go through that. We went through all the numbers and it wasn't the EBITDA wasn't as advertised, and to no fault of the seller, it was more of a, the broker was again over exaggerating some of these things. So because the bank's got to be comfortable too. So it isn't just necessarily about me. The other part is, well, the bank's got to be comfortable financing this deal.
Yep.
And so some of the add backs and some of the other things that were being added, the bank just was like, no, we're not going to accept that.
Yeah.
And that's always another challenge as well is getting the right bank with the right deal to get your deal closed is always a challenge too. And so we ended up, what we ended up doing is 3 or 4 weeks later, the broker came back and said, hey, we have to get a independent evaluation done, by the bank. They're going to require you to do that anyway. It's $2,500. The seller is willing to split it with you, and whatever they come back with, then that'll be a negotiation point for us to then finish, to then try to move this deal forward. And that's what we did. And it came back with some numbers that were more favorable for me, which was great. And then we settled on a price, and then we moved forward. So.
And how did it fall apart the 2 other times?
So the second time was because of the bank. The bank looked at the deal, from a front end perspective, from a BDR, the sales, the loan, sales guy. I guess I forget what they call him, but
yeah,
it looks good for him, right? And he's like, yeah, I can get this through. But obviously, when it goes to underwriting, right, and when it goes to committee and all those other things, like they have different opinions about it. And they came back and were like, hey, we like the deal, but we like it at this number. Right. And so it's like you either have to come up with the extra capital yourself or find another bank, essentially. And at that point, we're already 6 weeks in, right, to really trying to get this deal closed. I've gone to the QE stuff. I've got money invested. And so I was like, I'm not comfortable putting in all that extra capital. Like I'm not financing all this myself, and so I had to come up with an alternative solution. So the deal again almost died just from that perspective. And then the third time was because of the attorneys. So he switched attorneys and I switched attorneys. And then it was 2 months of just additional agony of trying to get the attorneys on the same page and come into an agreement, right, on paper that made sense for everybody. So whenever I talk about my story and getting my deal closed, I always tell people two things. One, you got to make sure you find a good attorney, right,
Yeah.
that you have a conversation with even before you have a deal in place. So at least they know who you are and what you're looking for and what kind of support you're going to need, and making sure it's a good fit for you. And two is finding a capital advisor, right? Somebody that has connections with banks, right? That knows all the SBA players. And so when you have a deal, they know what bank to get it to make sure it gets funded, because not all these banks have the same appetite. They don't have the same buy boxes like you do, right? They're looking for completely different stuff to invest in. And I didn't know that, right? I thought all SBA lending was the same. Like, hey, you do SBA, cool. Here's my deal, right? Fund me, you know. But that would have saved me some time and some heartache as well. Is having somebody in my corner that knows the SBA arena and all the players and what they're looking to invest in and finance. It would have got my deal done a lot faster.
Your great tips and learnings. And where did you guys end up landing in terms of how you structured the deal, how you structured maybe some of the owner transition stuff, since you mentioned the owner was a technician, and then
Yeah.
and how much did you ultimately have to put down?
Yeah. So we a couple things there. So the deal structure was I had to put in 20% capital of my own, which ended up being roughly around 300,000, 350, somewhere in that range. And then the seller took a 10% note, which was a 2-year standby, but it had a balloon payment at the end, at year 5, which I didn't realize that. But at the time, whenever you had a balloon payment, that didn't count for equity injection into the deal, right? Yeah, I didn't realize that. And I had already negotiated that with the seller. So the bank's like, technically, we can't count this 10%, as a down payment, right? So,
Because otherwise it would have been 10% down instead of 20.
right, 100%. Yeah. So again, just things that you don't know about. And so I tried to go back to the sellers like, hey, you don't mind like removing this balloon? And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. Like I'm trying to get my money out of this business as soon as I can. And so I was like, oh, all right, fine. And so he'd already kind of given me some concessions. And so I didn't want to beat him up too much. So that's what it ended up being. And so anyway, so we got like kind of all that done and squared away, and the rest was done through obviously an SBA loan. And yeah, and so I'm coming up on year 2 actually next month. And so my first seller note payment is actually due. So
Crazy. And how did you structure that transition with the seller? Was he
oh yes.
expected to stay on
Yep.
for a period of time?
Yep. So we negotiated a 6-month period of time where he would stay on as a technician, so to speak, right? So he was still running calls for roughly about 5.5 months. I kind of, after month 5, he was like, you really don't need me anymore. And I'm like, you're right. It was nice to have him around, right?
Yeah.
But he was ready. He was so ready to kind of go start the next phase of his life. And so I didn't want to hold him to it. But yeah, so I built that in the 6 months for him to stay on board. And it was great. Like I enjoyed, him coming on board or staying with me and kind of working through all that stuff. And it worked out well.
Tell us about maybe the early days of taking over the business. What did that actual transition period look like? And you spoke about how, you said 70% of business is, very similar, but you still have to learn the nuances of each industry, right? So tell us how that went for you.
Yeah, I learned throughout my career, whenever you go into a new situation, you got to sit back and absorb, right, and learn as much as you can before you start to come in and make sweeping changes. Because there's one thing that people don't like is change, especially after an acquisition. They're already surprised, like because the seller doesn't tell anybody, and you're not going to be able to talk to anybody until like day 1, right? And so we went to closing on a Friday, and he on Thursday started to call all the techs, right? So the day before, like, hey, this is what's going on. Friday, we go to closing. Friday, I show up there. Friday, right after lunch, I show up there. Hey, I'm the new boss, right? And So everyone was kind of like taken back and just really trying to absorb what happened. And so, I just went in with just kind of like an attitude of, hey, I'm not here to change anything. I'm not here to like do anything different. I'm here to learn from you guys. I'm here to help this company grow bigger than it is today. And hopefully I can offer some change that makes your lives easier, makes it better, maybe allows you to make some more money or do some things differently, and hopefully really help you in your career path, right, and your growth. And so the first several months was just that, right? I only touched things that I knew wouldn't cause an issue and that would provide immediate benefit, like our email. Like no one had a company email address. It was all through like Yahoo and AOL and like so first thing first is like, no, we already had a decent website. The website was okay. I already had domain names. Like, guys, what are we doing? Like $50 a month. Let's get some real email addresses in here. So that was the first like change, so to speak, that I made. The second thing was we were using an old analog phone system and we had a fax machine, right? And so threw that stuff out the window, and so and getting a real phone system then allowed us to do some really cool things with our phones, right? Like have an IVR and have an answering service, and like it wasn't tape recordings and like having to forward like the old service manager would forward the analog phones to his cell phones every night before we left.
That's wild.
So he would then answer the phone on his cell phone whenever we get after hours calls. I'm like, what? Why are you doing that? Like, you're working way too much. So that's what we did. We got an actual real phone system, and then I hired an answering service to answer our after hours calls. Like, boom, immediate benefit, right?
Team take these early changes? Were they initially resistant, or are they like, okay, like this makes
No,
sense?
thankfully, most of the technicians were younger, right? So
Okay.
I didn't have a lot of older, 55 plus, been in the industry for a very long time, don't really like change, like to do things their way. I know I'm stereotyping a little bit, but it is what it is. And so that kind of stuff, they didn't really bat an eye at because it wasn't a big deal for them, right? This was just, just another, it was easy because they had grown up around technology already. So it wasn't anything, that they needed to adapt to.
Yeah.
But I didn't start making anything like real big changes until like later on, right after I was about 6 months in.
I'm curious, before even diving into some of those changes later on, tell us a little bit about the business. Give us a little overview of maybe the industry, what you like about it. Obviously what initially attracted you to it, we kind of spoke about, but since being, on the other side, what do you continue to like about the industry, about the model? And yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, so PGM, when I bought the company, and I say when I bought it because we only did hot side, so commercial food service equipment and repair, right? And PGM specifically specialized in just the hot side equipment. So anything that required gas, electricity, steam, that's what they worked on in service inside of commercial kitchens. So anywhere from grocery stores to hospitals to your mom and pop restaurants to your big restaurants, like you chains, like all fast food, all that stuff, right? And in the state of Florida, in order to do anything with gas, you had to have a gas license, right? So that was another thing that was intriguing about the business too. So when I bought the company, that's what they specialized in. That's what they did, right? They had lots of great customers, local customers, big brand names, and everything in between. And so now today we now also do refrigeration, right? So not only do we do the hot side, but we also do the cold side. And when I was looking at the company, that was one of the areas where I was like, man, we talk about scalability, right? I have a thriving customer base that I can offer a whole new service to, right? And then that alone could potentially double the size of the company, right? If you really look at, the numbers there without even having to go and advertise to new customers or get new logos or expand to a new territory. I don't have to do any of that. I just have to offer a new service. And it, obviously a little bit more complicated than that. You just, but but on paper, that's what I wanted to do. And so now here, year two, that's what we're doing. So now we cover everything inside of your commercial kitchen. So
So no real installs. It's really servicing maintenance.
now we do some installs, right? So we have some customers that will buy equipment and they'll have it delivered to our shop, and then we'll stage it, get it ready, and then swap out like a new piece, an old piece of equipment. We're not doing any kind of design, right? We're not a reseller, we're not a retailer. We don't do any of that stuff. It's 95% repair, service and repair work.
Got it. I'm curious with like, tell us about kind of the repeat behavior there, or how often are these customers calling you? Or how often do you go and
Yeah, it
check up on the
depends,
equipment?
right? Like a high volume place, like a hospital. Like we have a major hospital in the area, a couple of them that we support, and they cook 3 meals a day for 400 patients, 500 patients. And so they're constantly breaking stuff. They constantly need service, right? And we're in and out of that. We're in there weekly, like literally weekly, whether it's the dish machine, right? Because that is they beat that up all the time, whether it's anything on the line that they're working on, or like all that, they're just constantly. And then,
And how much are they paying you each time? What is like an average visit?
so an average ticket is around $820
Every week they're like something's broken.
every week. And those customers are probably spending more like $15 to $2,000, right? Because there's parts and things that need to be replaced. And then some customers, we have ones that maybe just something simple and silly that is just a basic service fee and a trip charge, and there's no parts. It's just they needed something recalibrated, or maybe they didn't understand how to relight the pilot, or some of those little quirky things that may happen. So
It's interesting. I mean, what do you like about the model as the operator of this business now?
I like that Americans love to eat out, right? That's our culture is that, right? We're so busy, we're running, and I don't think that's going to change anytime in the future, right? I think that it's I don't want to say recession proof, but even when times are bad, maybe people pull back how much they eat out, but they still eat out. And so, so with that, like it's it's just a great business model for that because they're always going to need their stuff fixed. And typically, when the economy has a downturn, they actually call repair companies before they look to them replace, right?
Makes
So
sense.
I think it's a great little business. It's a great little industry. And there's some private equity that's playing in the space, but not like it is in the home service side, right? Not like home service, HVAC or plumbing or any of that space is really blowing up with private equity coming in and scooping up all the companies. So
Tell us about maybe some of the challenges as well you kind of deal with in the industry.
techs, like anything, techs, like any service trade, and even back office can be a little challenging too, right? Find the right people that have experience in the industry. I've been fortunate. I hired two people that had already been in the industry, had already done some level of service and dispatch, and so they're like we're crushing it on that side now, and it's given me a lot of relief in the back office to where I can focus on the growth side of it. But techs are always going to be the bottleneck, right? Good techs, right? And so that's a challenge. Also, too, breaking into some of these legacy relationships with manufacturers. Some of these other service companies have been around for a long time, and one of the key areas for growth is warranty work for manufacturers, right? So if you do the warranty work for a particular manufacturer, and if they have their equipment in, like, say, all the Chick-fil-A's, guess what's gonna happen? They're gonna be calling you to go to all the Chick-fil-A's when they break the fryers, right? And that's good for you. It's good for you in several ways. One, because it's continuous repeat work, but two, it gets you into locations that maybe you would never have access to otherwise.
Yeah.
And so you can go in and say, "Hey, I fixed your fryer, but I can also do your ice machine. I can also do your refrigeration. I can also sign you up for a PM contract. That way, I stay sticky with you." Right? So, but that can be challenging sometimes because all these manufacturers work differently as far as how they set up their service. Some manufacturers say, "Hey, come in, take this little training course. Boom, you can work on our equipment." Some manufacturers like Wolf and Sub-Zero, in particular, they have territories assigned to them. Like they have one service company that services that entire territory. That's it, right?
Wow.
So it's trying to navigate that and navigating where you can get those little wins from, which manufacturers that you want to have a relationship with, and then what your customers currently have, right, inside of their kitchens. So
And did the business come with any of these legacy relationships?
no, and which was crazy because everyone that I've talked to over the last 2 years were like, hey, the hot side is the hardest part, is the hardest side of the business, right? To really grow. Refrigeration's a lot easier. The margins are better. And like it's more of an emergency thing. Like people will go with their kitchen equipment sometimes not working at 100% to avoid the bill, right? But if the fridge goes down, you're calling somebody. There's no messing around because you lose product.
Yeah.
And so, that was one bit of feedback that I got. Like, man, you've already got established on the harder side of the business. And two, we only had one real manufacturer that we did any kind of warranty support for. So all of our work it's all post warranty, break fix, and customers were calling us, right?
Wow.
Once they stopped having to deal with the company that was doing the warranty, once they were out of warranty, they were calling us instead, right? Because they didn't want to deal with the people that were covering warranty. So
That's so interesting.
yeah.
And no, I mean, you mentioned that, first 6 months, you didn't touch much. Did you feel like you were able to learn the business pretty well, pretty quickly by that point, at
Yeah.
the 6-month mark?
Yeah, because I just sat in the office and listened to my old service manager all day, right? I just, just absorbed everything he was doing, all the nuances about parts and customers and just all that stuff. I just listened. And I slowly started to help out, grab the phones, and I remember my first weekend where I covered the phones, right? So typically we're a smaller company, right? So our old service manager, he used to cover the phones on the weekends, and he would actually answer the phones and then give the techs the actual work orders to then go run for emergency services. And this is so I got the answering service in place. And then one weekend, Gary was like, "Hey, Brian, like I'm sorry, I got to take a weekend off." I'm like, "Sure, man, absolutely." So I had to cover the phones, and so it was a little nerve wracking for me, right? To didn't have to call these customers back and and tell them, "Hey, this is when the technician's gonna be by there. This is what our rates are." Like it was just it was
You got thrown right in.
yeah. But I figured it out and it was fine. And so, but yeah, it was fun. I look back at it like thinking to myself, man, you were thinking about it way too much. It wasn't that serious.
That's great. And in the first 6 months, even while you weren't doing much actively to change the business or grow the business, was it performing as you kind of expected? Because obviously that's one of the reasons people buy businesses, right? Is that it's profitable, it comes with cash flow, etc.
Yeah, 100% was. And part of though, when you buy a business, the business now has to take on the additional debt from that acquisition, right?
Yeah.
And typically that's why people buy larger or try to buy larger businesses because it can absorb that. But we just fine performance wise. I think one of the things that I missed, I didn't catch on to as quickly, was having to chase after people to get paid. And because I wasn't used to that. Like I came from the MSP world where maybe we had 60 customers, right? And they paid us X amount of dollars per month, every month. They were all on contracts, recurring revenue. Didn't have to do a lot of chasing. But at PGM, we have a database of 5,000 customers, right? And they could call us at any time. And not all of them, some were on term, some were on, cash on delivery, some, and so it was just a lot to try to manage that. Imagine if you're doing, so on average, we're doing like 1,000 different customers a month. Trying to manage that from an accounts receivable perspective is a lot. And then if you let people slip for 30 days, right? Then you go to try to chase them down for money. You're not gonna get that money for another 30 days.
Yeah.
Right? Because you already gave them the 30 days, right? So they're like, oh, I can wait another 30 days. So, and cash is king, especially the first year, 2 years, right? You're trying to scrape and keep that cash flow coming into the business as much as possible. So that's one challenge that I faced with early on wasn't the business wasn't making money, it was the cash the cash wasn't coming in like it should have been, right? And that
Yeah.
was just more of a process adjustment that we had to make sure that one, that we're not giving people terms out anymore, right? Unless it's a notable customer. And two, we gotta stay on top of customers and reaching out to them about collecting, right? About making sure we're getting paid. So
No, that's interesting. Tell us about some of the maybe the bigger moves you made and changes you made, after that 6-month mark, and which ones were kind of highest leverage or biggest impact for you guys?
biggest impact was we switched our field service management solution to something that was more industry specific. I mean, that was a big change. And anytime you migrate a platform like that, it's time consuming, it's challenging, it's something for the back office has to learn it, the techs have to learn it. And then with that, it allowed us to do inventory management because before there was no inventory management. And I went through and did inventory on our vans, and we had thousands and thousands of dollars of parts just sitting there, just hanging out.
Wow.
And it was like this, mind blowing. But that again, that was it had to be done and it needed to be done, but that was a huge undertaking. You're talking about, 15 plus years of just accumulation of stuff, not only on the vans, but also in the warehouse. It was just super time consuming, but we got it done and now things are more manageable. I know what our inventory looks like. I know what parts we need to keep in stock. I know what, things that we don't need to order, like all that stuff. Like, really running and managing our inventory has really changed as well. So those are the two really big changes. I also started providing the tech's health coverage, right? I got them 401ks, like, some of the more benefits side of it. We signed up for Safesa, which is our industry association, getting our guys trained, which I think is important, which something that they really didn't focus on before. So, I think those were some of the real big changes that we made. And then obviously taking on refrigeration, starting to do refrigeration is another huge, huge, I guess you call it a change, but something that we're doing different.
And how's that been going, the addition of the refrigeration?
It's been going well. Like we haven't really even advertised it yet, and I'm keeping 2 guys busy, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and I just from and so this is what I found, what was happening is when we're getting calls in, for service, and 3 or 4 times a week, we would get a refrigeration call. And we don't advertise refrigeration, we didn't do refrigeration, and so our service manager was like, "Sorry, call somebody else. Sorry, call these guys, call these guys," I'm like, "Wait, we're giving away money here, right?"
Yeah.
I'm thinking about lead gen, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
"Man, how can I capitalize on this?" So I just decided to you know what, it's time to do that, and I found a guy, brought him on board, was a senior guy, has a refrigeration license, was able to kind of plant him in the business, and we're just running the calls, from his book of business, but also from our current customers that then call in and say, "Hey, I need some refrigeration work done." And so I've been able to keep those 2 guys fairly busy. And like I said, we're not even advertising it yet, not on our website, not anywhere, like, any kind of prep material or Google, like, none of that stuff. Like, no one really even
Yeah.
knows we do refrigeration yet. And again, like I said, keeping 2 guys busy. So
Wow. And I'm curious, when you're hiring these technicians, are they usually bring you a book of business as well? How does that work?
sometimes they do. And what I found is that, like anything, customers follow the tech. Right? If they and not all customers, right? There's some that don't have that level of relationship with an individual tech, but some of the smaller companies, 100%, 100%. Like there's a really good customer that he brought over to us that we would never even, thought of or had access to, but they came over because they liked him. They were used to working with him all the time, and they're like, "No, we're gonna start doing business with you guys." I was like, "Hey, great."
Yeah,
I'll
that
think
is great.
I'll think
Does that make you worry about sort of the tech leaves that they kind of leave with their book of business?
No, I mean, because I think that's gonna happen, it's the universe, right? It ebb and flows, and I think too, we take really good care of our techs, all right? So if they're leaving, they're probably moving out of state, or maybe they want to go do their own thing. I think that's if I was ever concerned about a tech leaving, it wouldn't be for a competitor. It would be for them going out and starting their own thing, and which a part of me kind of somewhat encourages that, right?
Yeah.
Because of where I came from. At the same time, like, hey, don't touch our customers, though.
Be an entrepreneur, but don't touch our
No, no, no,
customers.
no, no. Why don't you go somewhere south or north of Tampa, and then we're good, right?
Yeah. It's same. Yeah, you mentioned scalability is one of the main reasons or main things you're looking for in buying a business, initially. You've already started sort of scaling into refrigeration. I guess first, how much have you been able to grow the business since you bought it?
We are on track to double our revenue from the time that I bought it this year, which sounds kind of crazy, and even sounds crazy to me when I looked at the numbers this quarter. We did almost 1.2 million in top line sales, which was just phenomenal for us, right?
Well done.
Yeah, and so we're cranking away, and yeah, I kind of had a feeling it was there. It just needed to be uncovered.
Yeah.
Just gotta go look for it. And my old service manager, like he was running the whole show, like the whole office. And so there was, again, during that 6-month period, I heard lots of times where we would turn customers away because we just didn't have the time or availability. So I knew it was there, right? It was just putting the process in place, putting the people in place, and then going to find the right techs to then be able to then go do the work. So
So you felt like the biggest lever was really just solving for the demand you already had, is what you're saying. You didn't have to go do additional lead gen to double the business.
no, I mean, now I did update the website, and we do some Google, advertising and run some Google ads. I think that's all. You still have to do that stuff, and it has generated obviously some leads and some new customers. When I bought the company, the vans didn't have any kind of wraps on them, so I got all the vans wrapped, did all that, and so we redid the logo. Like, this is a new logo design, like something new and modern, and so we did all those things, and I'm sure they help, right? They absolutely do. But yeah, I think a lot of it was just hearing for those first 6 months, just the amount of business that we turn away because we didn't have the time or resources to actually service the customer. So, which was a testament to my old service manager, because he was like, I don't want to ruin our current customers' relationships chasing after new business.
Right.
And I'm like, no, I want new business, right? But I understood why he was doing it, because you can't tick off your current customers to go chase after new ones, because then you'll never grow. You're just being a rat wheel, so to speak. So
I'm curious, you mentioned doubling your top line sales. How is that translated to the bottom line?
So it's been about the same. We're about 15%, right? Somewhere in that range. And that flows too based on, what we're doing that month, whether we're investing in some, a tech. So the biggest cost is the employees, right? And anytime you onboard a new technician, it takes them about 3 to 6 months, depending on their skill level, to start generating some revenue for you. They got to come in, they got to learn, they got to understand your way of doing business, your process. And so the really good senior techs, I can get them up to speed in about a month, right? So then they're out producing, but you're not seeing that revenue come in for at least another, 30 days, right? For someone that maybe isn't as experienced, it could be 6 months. Right? So you're having to carry that overhead for quite some time. And so initially, when I was hiring new techs, it was a burden, right? Trying to get new guys up to speed. When I hired some guys that maybe weren't the right fit too, unfortunately, and that hurt us a little bit last year. But now I know what I'm looking for. I know what I need. Like, it's like I got a recruiter who's awesome, who's finding me guys. So I don't have.
What is it that you've learned to become better at recruiting and hiring that, in terms of what you're looking for in these types?
Well, right now, we're like, if you don't have at least 5 years of experience, you can't come work at PGM. So at least that's what I have my recruiter, really focused on. Some of the more, junior and mid-level guys, we'll obviously take a look at as well. But they have to be humble. And I say that because they can't come in asking for, top top hourly rate because they've been in the business for 4 years, right? "Oh, I've done HVAC for 4 years. I'm making $40 an hour." Like, well, you're not gonna make $40 an hour here, not with 4 years of experience and only knowing cold side. Like, you gotta that's just not that's not what the market's paying right now. So that's like the first sign is like, okay, do you actually know what your value is to the market? And do you know where you need to go to improve your value? Right? Do you have any inclination of what that looks like? And if you don't, you're only chasing after, a higher hourly rate, then you're probably not a good fit for us at PGM. And so, because honestly, our guys, we have them on obviously they make it their hourly rate, but we have them on a sales compensation package where they get commission every month. So based on their closed work orders, they get a percentage of that number.
Yeah.
So our guys on average, they make I got mid-level guys that make anywhere from 45 to $52 an hour with the commission built in, right? Their total earn for the year is in that range. And so that's another thing too. We want techs that want to come in and want to hustle, right? And not clock watch and not overbill the customer, right? Because you're sitting in your car or sitting in the van or, you know, taking your time, messing around. Like, no. Because if our techs don't hit their commission goal each month, they don't get paid the commission. Right. So there is no time for them to be goofing off at a job and milking the clock, right? They can't. And so our culture is a little different because of that. And so it helps with the customer because now the customer doesn't have to, worry about us kind of milking the clock. Two, it keeps the techs moving, right? And they have a goal to reach and they know that they can make more money based on how effective and efficient they are at closing their work orders. And three, it helps us because they can't get that anywhere else.
And is that the incentive structure you kind of inherited, or did you put that in place?
No, I inherited that. Unfortunately, I can't take the credit for that, right? But I've used it because I've looked and because I've talked to some of the other techs that have worked for other competitors in the area. I know what they're paying those guys. I'm like, come over here. I don't like pay you more, but I think you'll have more fun at your at work too. So
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So they kind of have to hit a floor before the commissions even kick in.
yeah,
And then after that floor, they get a percent, basically.
they get a percent. Yeah, we have a scale, all right, and like the new guys that come in, it's not as high, right? It's lower, but they get a lower percentage. Senior guys that come in, they get that higher percent, and there's no cap.
Wow, that's great.
No cap. I mean, my guys. So whenever in a service business, you want your techs to be producing $350,000 a year is what the goal is. Our guys average like 425 a year, right? And I got some guys that do 550 a year in sales, right? So we do a lot of sales with smaller amount of techs, right? Which makes things more profitable. So
Wow, it's very impressive. You're approaching 2 years now, Brian. Where do you see this business headed in the next two? Tell us about, maybe before even going there, tell us about how your day-to-day has evolved.
as far as like in the business or just
Yeah, what you're working on and what you've been focused on.
Mm.
First 6 months, you're sitting in the office, absorbing
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
sponge, but how's that evolved since?
Yeah, so now I'm obviously not doing that anymore, and so after the first of the year, our old service manager went to retire, and so I took over his role, and then I started to hire people to kinda take some of those responsibilities from me, and that's what I mentioned, a few minutes ago, where I actually have some people now that have industry experience, and they're taking that day-to-day operations stuff, off of me, and where I don't have to focus on every work order, or every ticket, or every call, like someone else is doing that. I can just observe, look at the numbers and get some feedback, as we go. So now I can focus on growth, right? Which is hiring techs, the territories we want to get into. I'm also looking at another acquisition potentially, right? And starting to really put my vision on paper of where I want to take the company size wise and growth wise. So
Now that you're, looking at another acquisition and removing yourself from maybe some of the more day-to-day operations, do you think you want to grow this business to sell it one day? What's your thinking there?
I always get asked that question, and and through several, phases of this process. And I think that everyone has a price, right? So if someone backs up the Brinks truck, right, and drops it off at my driveway, then, hey, yeah, well, you know what, guys, I'm out, but going into it, no, I initially bought this company to grow and scale it, to be, to represent and to support most of Florida, to grow it to 80 to 100 technicians, somewhere in that range, and then see what happens from there, and a lot can change in the next 3 to 5 years, and so it's hard to say, hey, I'm going to build this for the next 5 years and then we're selling it, right? I know a lot of private equity companies have that playbook where it's like we acquire, we grow it, year 7, we're out, right? We're selling it, upstream. But for me, I like to keep things open, right? And not have any blinders on. But for now, it's about growth, getting to our next goal of 20 technicians, and then our next goal of 40 technicians, and maybe additional territories, and then kind of going from there.
I'm curious, as you're looking at these digital acquisitions, are they, in the same space? You're looking at growth or acquisition, or completely separate?
Yeah, I'm not like actively like seeking. I had just happened to have something that kind of fell on my lap, and I've been kind of going back and forth with it. But yes, it's in the same space. Like it's like I any kind of acquisitions that I'm looking at right now are going to be absorbed inside of PGM. I'm not looking to kind of step out of that just yet. Now I have lots of ideas, as most entrepreneurial minded people do, right? And now that I'm in the restaurant space, like I see all kinds of things. you know, So I gotta keep my ADHD under control, because I was like, oh, what about this? I can do that and this and that. Like, no, stop it. Like, focus on the task
Yeah.
at hand, right? So for now, it's getting PGM to a place where then maybe I can dabble in some other opportunities or some other acquisitions, as they become available.
I'm curious also, kind of taking a step back, coming from more of a white collar background. And I know you previously worked with some techs, but moving into really a blue collar business, anything unexpected, any learnings you have to share with folks that maybe are also coming from more white collar traditional or desk jobs?
You just got to be relatable, man. You just got to be relatable. Like, don't show up with your sweater vest on, and your button up shirt the first day. Like, that's too much. And so don't alienate yourself from the crew that's out making you money, right? And so I think that being able to wear a polo and a pair of jeans every day is nice. I know some people in tech, oh, I wore a t-shirt every day. Well, yeah, the tech I was in, I know that wasn't going to cut it when you're sitting down with other CEOs. Like, you just, you couldn't do that. But no, I mean, they're just people, right? And they're just people. The backgrounds may be a little bit more colorful, so to speak, but they're trying to do the same thing that you are. They're trying to support their family. They're trying to have a decent, consistent job, and they go home at night just like you do. So it's got to be relatable, be understanding, and you'll be fine. And don't manage from your Excel spreadsheet, right? Don't do that, right? Numbers matter, sure, right? But again, people matter, right? And so there's people involved in it. So
That's great advice. I think, final question for me, Brian, is, you came into this having already started a business. Tell us about, if this experience was kind of maybe what you expected, and how it's kind of been different from your last experience owning a business that you
yeah,
actually co-founded.
I honestly, I wish I would have bought something from the get go, right? Startups are fun, and they're fun when you're in your 20s, and it's like, oh yeah, this is great, and you're CEO of your own startup, and I wish I would have known more about how the finance side of business worked, right? How capital works and how to acquire capital, whether it's through institutions or through private equity or what have you. And so I would say yes, buy a business if you can, right? It obviously doesn't takes longer because the deals aren't always there. So if you have the patience and you have the stamina to find the right deal that works for you, then do that, go that course, right? Know that every deal has got some hair on it. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be
That's
perfect.
right.
And I've worked with large enterprise companies like Fortune 500. They don't have it figured out either, right? The small business, yeah, they may have, a fax machine and stuff, but they're still trying to figure it out too. So, know that you're going to be down in the trenches, and don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, roll up your sleeves, and get in there and get it done. And yeah, I think anyone can do it, man. Anyone can do it if you have the drive and the grit. Yeah, you can do it. But one thing too, because I talk to a lot of people all the time, and people reach out to me for advice and stuff, and I tell them like, don't rush into a deal, right? Just to get a deal closed. Don't do that either, because I've seen some horror stories of individuals buying something that just wasn't the right fit for them. It just wasn't the right fit. So don't be overly excited, to get a deal closed. Make sure it's going to fit for you and your lifestyle, and because one thing that changed in this business when I was doing my IT thing, I didn't have anything to do on the weekends. Like most of our customers were closed, but in the restaurant space, that's when they're the busiest is on the weekends. Right? So it's completely different, right? I get calls all weekend long, right? So I'm constantly looking at my phone on the weekend. So, my slow days, if I had one, were Monday, Tuesdays, typically not as crazy. But yeah, and that may not fit for some people's lifestyle. Like, I don't want to be bothered on the weekends. So gotta take all those things into consideration.
Yeah, it's a good call out, Brian. I think this has been, this has been very illuminating to me and to a lot of folks, and
Good.
I'm sure who are listening, and I'm sure folks will look and reach out and try to find you. So,
Sure. Yeah.
Brian, this is great. Really appreciate you hopping on today. Excited to hear where things go, the next 2 years and beyond. So let's please stay in touch, and we'll have to have you back on.
Absolutely. I appreciate the time, Helen, and yeah, I hope everyone finds this story valuable and helps them in their journey as well. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Brian.